Welcome to the Indonesia Economic Forum. We are very honored and very privileged to have with us today Mr. Francois De Maricourt. He is the President Director of HSBC Indonesia. Today, the world is reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic. The world's economy has changed dramatically as a result of the pandemic. Indonesia too has been impacted as slowdown in economic activities such as manufacturing, consumer spending, has caused many jobs to be lost. But there is hope on the way. There is optimism in the air in terms of a rebooting of the economy as governments grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic and bring cases down. Indonesia too is reopening its economy. Pak Francois, welcome. Thank you for joining us at the Indonesia Economic Forum. What do you think are the key challenges facing Indonesian corporations today?
So I think that when we look at the situation now, we need really to look at the impact of COVID-19. And the impact has been quite different depending on if you are in the manufacturing sector, of course, or in the service sector. So it's fair to say that manufacturing has been able to rebound relatively quickly after a dip at the beginning of the year, whilst service is still quite impacted. And the second wave that we see of coronavirus in Europe and in the US will of course not help. Having said that, we see some good progress happening, and we are quite optimistic about the economic progress of Indonesia for next year and the years to come. So our in-house economists forecast a growth of the Indonesian economy by more than 4% next year. And I think that it will relatively quickly come back to the natural trend of growth of around 5%, which is what Indonesia has been able to deliver for the last few years. The government has been quite fast to act and has enacted quite a strong supporting program. And it is supporting both the communities, and which is good for internal consumptions, of course, but also, and which I think for the longer term is also very important, there are a lot of programs to invest more in infrastructure, which will really support the growth and development of Indonesia over the years to come. And it will also help to attract more foreign direct investment. And the recent omnibus law, of course, is a very strong signals sent to investors.
Right. I think we've seen during the pandemic, especially certain sectors have accelerated the digitalization of the economy. We have seen work from home, study from home. People are getting used to digital technologies. Which sectors do you think will rebound the quickest as the economy comes out of the pandemic and starts to boost?
I think it's quite difficult to see if there is any one specific sector, because by now most sectors have adjusted to the new environment, to the new normal. And of course, you have areas like hospitality, tourism, travel that will benefit when we go back to a more normal situations. Even though I think it's fair to say that it will happen gradually. It will not come overnight like that. But more than that, if you look at the longer term trends, what we can see is that a lot of things will have changed. And actually this crisis will have accelerated some underlying trends that we had seen earlier in the past. You talked about digital. And I think I will talk about digital and automation together. And what we have seen, this crisis has been a huge accelerator for these trends. So if we look at, of course, the banking transactions, we have seen digital transactions increasing significantly by more than 38% quarter on quarter. And this is a trend that most of our customers have also seen. But I think that a lot of people now have started to use some digital tools, and the whole mindset has changed. And so I think it will be really a huge leap forward in terms of use of new technology. And that ultimately will actually benefit the economy and will force people to really make this change that otherwise might or might not happen. So this is true in terms of manufacturing process, of how you look at your customers, how you look at the ways of working. You mentioned working from home. I think it's fair to say that after this crisis, we expect a lot of people to continue to work quite often from home. and this will have an impact in terms of management, in terms of output, in terms of productivity, which it should be really a good boost of productivity, with people not spending so many hours in terrible traffic. So that's something that I think will really change things. But also in terms of the consumer side, how people approach a problem, how people want to transact. Now we have seen a lot of area like cash that is not doing so well, and a lot of people now will say, actually, do I need to do physical transaction? Maybe not. And so let's do it digitally, which is of course much more efficient. So I think after this crisis, a lot of people will continue to use digital transactions, which will improve productivity, will improve really the growth of economies, and that's a good thing.
Right. You mentioned two very important points, Francois. One, of course, is behavior. After a certain period, people get used to a certain behavior, which means they will not go back to the old way of doing things.
Correct.
So it is often said, in fact, it's becoming quite a cliche about the new normal.
Yes.
You know, but this is really, you know, as you say, digitalization, automation, IoT, many sectors are being impacted. And from your perspective and some of the clients that HSBC Indonesia has, do you see that companies are really accelerating this process of automation, of digitalization, especially IoT? Because in manufacturing, as we mentioned, you know, IoT is going to become critical.
Yes, absolutely. We see a huge trend, and when we discuss for customers, I think that most of our customers are asking us, okay, right, how can you help me to move towards much more digital transactions, automation? So you have area like blockchain transactions that can be extremely efficient, that we're working on. You have some other area, you mentioned Internet of Things, that's a field where I'm not a specialist, so I cannot comment. But what we see is that absolutely, people now want to say, we want to be much more efficient in our process. We want really to move into much more digital so that we become much more agile in our approach. And so now you need to be prepared if your office is closed, if your staff has to work from home, are you prepared for it? I think that the answer more and more is yes. Companies are prepared for it. They have changed their approach, they have changed their processes, and this will have quite a profound impact that should not be underestimated. And people will not go back, that's for sure, to the old system, and hence this terminology of new normal, which is not very nice, but I think really reflects quite a big shift in terms of approach, in terms of thinking on your approach and your process.
Right. You know, there's an old Chinese saying that, of course, in every crisis there is an opportunity. And Indonesia really has an opportunity today to also move towards what I would call more sustainable growth practices. Companies are approaching or adopting more sustainable business practices, especially those in natural resources and those in manufacturing. And also, of course, I think from the financial and banking sector, there's also a move towards promoting more sustainable financial products. How do you see that trend evolving and really the impact on Indonesia?
So this crisis can be an opportunity for Indonesia. As I mentioned, when we started in this crisis, Indonesia was well positioned. We had quite strong macroeconomic indicators, and 2020 was meant to be a wonderful year for Indonesia. So of course, the crisis has impacted our economy, and we see the impact in many ways, but probably less than some other countries. And now the question is, okay, how can we make the best, if I can say, of this crisis, so that Indonesia is strengthened by this crisis? One area where we see huge opportunities for Indonesia is a global supply chain. So what we see is that a lot of companies that were doing their manufacturing in China are rethinking where is the best place to do manufacturing. And you have a lot of consideration here. You have considerations on cost. China is expensive nowadays. People don't know that, but it's quite expensive. Salaries have increased significantly. But also you have of course, some geopolitical consideration, but also in terms of concentration risk. Do you want to have all of your supply chain from one source, or do you want to spread your risk? So as a result, a lot of companies across the world are thinking, okay, we need to have more diversification. And a lot of people have started to relocate the supply chain, the manufacturing operations, some to Vietnam, that has attracted a lot of FDI. And interestingly, Indonesia is not that much on the map currently. And the opportunity for Indonesia is if we can really leverage on the strength we have to make Indonesia a much better known story outside of ASEAN and Asia. I think in Asia people know, outside of Asia, much less so. We have a huge market, we have a huge population, but also we have a lot of natural resources. So we are close to the markets. And so Indonesia has huge opportunities to really increase the foreign direct investments, increase the share of manufacturing that we have. And in that respect, the recent Omnibus Law is a good signal because it tells to the outside world, Indonesia is open for business. And I think it's a really wonderful signal for investors.
Absolutely. I think the Omnibus Law really also cemented the government's commitment to attracting foreign direct investments, because in the Omnibus Law, one of the key factors is really reducing red tape, making licensing more efficient. How important is that message for foreign investors, people who are out there wanting to look at Indonesia or considering Indonesia?
Yes. So I think that when investors, of course, they look at different countries, they look at it from a lot of different angles. And so one angle is ease of doing business, and the Omnibus Law will help in that respect. Another aspect that we see more and more is on the ESG criteria. And so you mentioned earlier the importance of sustainability. I think that more and more investors are also looking at the track record and how well prepared the country is in terms of sustainability. So everything related to the impact on environment, but also in terms of governance, and the social criteria are important factors that more and more investors are looking at. And it is really encouraging to see that the government also is looking at these factors. You have seen that recently the government has issued a green sukuk with some very strong commitments to support the green economy and to support the transition of Indonesia to greener economy. And that's the kind of initiatives that also are very well received by external investors when they look at countries.
You mentioned green economy and the green sukuk bond, which I think is very critical, especially for the energy sector, right? Because the energy sector is also looking towards becoming less dependent on fossil fuel. Of course, Indonesia has a large deposits of coal, but I think there's also now an effort and a movement towards looking at green energy alternatives, whether it's solar, whether it's wind. From Hong Kong Bank's perspective, do you see a lot more interest in financing green energy products or green energy projects?
Absolutely. We see a lot of interest towards more renewable energy. And actually, it's wider than that. It's not only about the energy, it's the whole sustainability agenda. And so HSBC actually is the leading bank in this space. We have made some quite strong commitments to support our clients to transition to this new world where sustainability is much more important. We have recently been awarded the award of Best Bank in terms of sustainability by Euromoney. And this really reflects on all the work we have done to increase the financing of these projects. And I will expect that this is a trend that will grow in the years to come. And a lot of people are talking about the Paris Agreement, global warming, and the fact that there are some changes also in the US in terms of approach, I think could really be a game changer, and we should see a lot of investments towards more sustainable projects. And HSBC is, of course, leading the way here, and we are involved in many projects in terms of sustainability.
Right, that's really good to hear. I think, the whole drive towards sustainability. Francois, the other point that you mentioned about, supply chains, while, globalization has brought benefits to large parts of the world and to many countries. There's a slight backlash towards globalization today. And there's also kind of a shifting process within the supply chain where companies are now looking at localization within the globalization, where they want to be closer to the market. You don't want to have to depend on too many suppliers where you know. Do you see, how does Indonesia position itself within this new environment where, you know, it's called hyperlocalization or globalization with a local angle?
That's a very good point, because this is really the kind of factors that might have a huge impact on Indonesia. Why? Because first of all, we have a huge domestic market, 260 million people, and this market is growing. The emergence of affluent and mass affluent consumers in Indonesia will really have a huge impact in terms of the consumption in Indonesia. So as you said, a lot of manufacturers want to be close to the market. At the same time, we are close to the natural resources that are used for manufacturing, which is good. But when we talk about supply chain, I think that you have also something to consider, which is what we call sustainable supply chain.
Right.
Because around 80% of the impact on the environment come not from the companies themselves, but from their supply chain. And by improving the sustainability in the supply chain, you can have a huge positive impact. That's why at HSBC we have launched a program called Sustainable Supply Chain, where we try to partner with some companies to incentivize their suppliers to be more sustainable and to adopt the best practices in terms of sustainability. To have, let's say, some LEED certified factories, which is much better in terms of impact on environment, to avoid the waste of water and decrease consumption of water, decrease consumption of energy. And so there are really a lot of things are happening in this area. And I think that the sustainable supply chain for Indonesia is really a product that could really have an impact on the market.
Right. So I think if you look you know, at a longer term horizon, you know, beyond COVID-19, beyond 2021, but let's say, you know, Indonesia has set itself some ambitious targets, you know, by 2030, by 2045, it wants to be one of the top global economies in the world. It has committed to the Paris climate change accord, certain targets. As a bank, and of course you have clients in Indonesia and in the region, how do you see Indonesia, you know, vis-a-vis its regional competitors? You know, do you see that this country has a good runway going forward?
Yeah, I do think that Indonesia has huge opportunities. And so we are very bullish on Indonesia, and that's why we are investing more in Indonesia and we are growing our business. And we plan to continue to grow in Indonesia. Having said that, what is interesting is that the level of awareness about Indonesia is not very high. And I think that we have a lot of work to do to make sure that people know more about Indonesia, know more about the opportunities in Indonesia, because currently that's not really the case. So the branding of Indonesia is quite important. And this, in addition to all the different work that the government is doing to improve the business environment in Indonesia, should really support the growth of Indonesia in the years to come.
Right. And on that note, actually, we're very grateful for HSBC for being partners for this year's Indonesia Economic Forum. Probably because the Indonesia Economic Forum, one of our mandate is to promote Indonesia to the world and to promote Indonesia's new narrative and to change, or not to change, but to actually influence the global business community, you know, in terms of investing in Indonesia. But Francois, as a closing statement or some closing thoughts, looking forward, you know, we mentioned how Indonesia needs to probably project its voice a little bit stronger and wider around the world. As HSBC, I mean, I'm sure the bank is also a big promoter of Indonesia. How do you see, how can Indonesia really kind of, you know, promote what's good about it in a better way?
Yeah. I think that, as you said, that's really critical for Indonesia to be able to increase is engagement with the rest of the world, so that more people know about opportunities in Indonesia, which in turn will help to increase the foreign direct investments, and that will support the economic growth of Indonesia. So at HSBC, one thing that we are doing is to really leverage our global network and to talk about Indonesia. And so recently I was discussing with some clients in Egypt about opportunities in Indonesia. We have a lot of seminars conducted with some of our clients worldwide to really raise the profile of Indonesia. And also these kind of events, I think, are great platforms so that we can talk about Indonesia, what is working well, where are opportunities, but also I think that we need to be very candid that there are some areas that could be improved too. And it's quite critical that we are all aware of areas that potentially can slow us down in terms of our economic growth, because we have huge opportunities. So now the question is, how do we fulfill our opportunities and how we really make the best of it?
Exactly. So thank you very much. And I think you'll be happy to know that this year the Indonesia Economic Forum is going to be global because it's going to be a virtual conference. We will have participants and speakers from across the world, from the United States, from Australia, from Singapore, from Malaysia. And participants also will be dialing in. And this is, but Francois, I think, like you said, this is the good change for Indonesia, an opportunity that we are using to really project Indonesia's message to the world. So thank you very much. And again, thank you so much to HSBC for your support and partnership at the Indonesia Economic Forum this year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.